He tore his shirt apart, clawing at his skin as dark fur began to sprout from his body. His teeth elongated into sharp fangs. Within moments, he transformed into a feral beast. Under the silvery glow of the full moon in the village of Ogodo, a group of children sat in a semicircle around Nne, the oldest woman in the village. Her wrinkled face shimmered in the moonlight, and her voice carried the weight of countless tales. The children's wide eyes reflected both fear and fascination as Nne began her story. Far beyond the great mountain, Nne said, pointing to the towering silhouette in the distance, lies the cave of Henry. It is said to be the dwelling place of a powerful witch. Her name is Olumiri, and she possesses a ring unlike any other. This ring, Nne's voice dropped to a whisper, is said to bring immeasurable wealth to anyone who claims it. Not just to them, but to their children and their children's children. A fortune that lasts for generations. The children gasped, their imaginations running wild with the thought of such wealth. Onos, the boldest of the group, furrowed his brow and asked, Nne, if this ring can make someone so rich, why hasn't anyone gone to get it? We all live in poverty here. Nne's eyes darkened. Many have tried Onos, she said solemnly. Brave men, strong men, even cunning men, all have ventured to the cave of Henry, but none ever returned. Legends say the witch guards her ring with ferocious spirits and ancient curses. The cave is said to be a labyrinth designed to trap the greedy and foolish. What happens to them? Whispered Adane, her voice trembling. Nne shook her head slowly. No one knows. Some say they turn to stones. Others say they are consumed by the shadows, their souls trapped within the cave for eternity. Whatever their fate, none ever lived to tell the tale. The children huddled closer together, the thrill of fear tingling their spines. Another child, Kosi, asked, What does she look like? Nne said, leaning forward. They say she is as old as time itself, her face hidden behind a veil of darkness. Her single eye burned like embers, and her voice can command the winds. But most terrifying of all is her laughter. It echoes through the mountains, chilling the hearts of all who hear it. The children's imaginations painted vivid pictures of the witch and her cursed cave. Onos, however, seemed more curious than frightened. If someone could defeat the witch and take her ring, he mused, they could save the whole village. Nne's gaze fixed on him, her voice firm. Be careful with your thoughts, Onos. Greed has led many to their doom. Sometimes, the promise of wealth is not worth the price one must pay. The children sat in silence, the crackling of the fire filling the air. Finally, Nne clapped her hands. Enough stories for tonight. Go home and rest, my children. Reluctantly, the children bade her good night, their small voices echoing into the cool night air. They scattered to their homes, the story lingering in their minds. Years later, the poverty in the village of Ogodo only seemed to worsen. Onos, now a grown man, tried his best to provide for his family, Nkiru and their two daughters, by fishing. But the fish were scarce, and his earnings were barely enough to feed his family. One night, as they sat in their small hut, Onos turned to his wife, Nkiru. He began hesitantly.
I have been thinking about the ring of wealth.
Nkiru's eyes widened in alarm. No, Onos, she said firmly. You can't. It's forbidden for a reason. Think of our girls. What if something bad happens to you?
But what if I succeed?
Onos argued.
We have struggled for too long. This could be our way out of poverty.
Please don't. Despite her protests, Onos made up his mind. The next day, he spoke to his two closest friends, Ike and Azua, about his plan. At first, they were hesitant, but the thought of unimaginable wealth eventually swayed them and they agreed to accompany him. 2 days later, the trio set out for the cave of Henry. To reach the mountain behind which the cave lay, they first had to cross the dreaded river of Oshimili. The river's dark waters were said to be home to creatures of legend, and its crossing was feared by all. As they stood on the riverbank, Ike and Azua hesitated.
Are you sure about this, Onos?
Ike asked, his voice trembling. Onos nodded, his determination unwavering.
Think of what we stand to gain. Our families will never suffer again.
Motivated by his resolve, the three men climbed into a small wooden boat and began paddling. The river was eerily quiet at first, the only sound being the splash of their oars. But as they reached the middle of the river, the boat began to shake violently. Suddenly, the water erupted, and a monstrous beast with several heads emerged. Its eyes glowed like fire, and its many mouths roared in unison. The men froze in terror, unable to react. Before they could think of what to do, the creature lunged, and in one swift motion, it swallowed Ike whole, his screams echoing as it disappeared into the beast's gaping maw. Onos and Azua paddled desperately, their hearts pounding as they raced to the shore. The beast roared behind them, but they managed to escape his reach and collapse onto the riverbank, gasping for breath. As they prepared to enter the forest of Uri, Azua's courage wavered.
I can't do this anymore, Onos. I want to go back.
He stammered. Onos grabbed him by the shoulders.
Please, Azua, we have come this far. We can't give up now.
Reluctantly, Azua agreed, and together they entered the dense forest. The trees loomed tall, their twisted branches blocking out the sunlight. The air was thick with the sounds of unseen creatures. When night fell, they decided to rest. They built a small fire and sat close to it, speaking in hushed tones about their journey. But as they talked, a strange wind began to blow, extinguishing the fire. Before they could react, a wild animal leapt out of the darkness and snatched Azua from behind. Ono screamed, but it was too late. Azua's cries faded into the night, leaving Onos alone and terrified. At dawn, Onos gathered his courage and pressed on. His body ached and his heart was heavy with fear, but he refused to turn back. He climbed the mountain, each step feeling like an eternity. When he finally reached the other side, he saw it, the cave of Inri, its dark entrance gaping like the mouth of a beast. Ono stood at the entrance of the cave of Inri, his heart pounding like a drum. The darkness inside seemed alive, almost breathing as though it knew he was there. Taking a deep breath, he stepped in, his torch casting flickering shadows on the damp walls. The air grew colder with each step, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of his footsteps. Deep in the middle of the cave, Onos froze. There she was, Olumiri, the one-eyed witch. She sat hunched on a throne of jagged rocks, her single fiery eye glowing in the darkness. Fear gripped Onos and his knees buckled, sending him to the ground. Immediately, the witch's head snapped up and she sniffed the air like a predator, catching the scent of its prey. "Who dares invade my domain?" she hissed. "Show yourself!" Onos bit his lip, staying silent. It was then he realized the witch was blind. Her single eye was sightless, her movements guided by her other senses. Carefully, Onos crouched low, scanning the cavern for any sign of the ring. "I know you're here," Olumiri snarled, waving her gnarled walking stick. "I can feel your presence. Come out!" As she pointed around the cave, Ono saw it, the ring. It sat gleaming on her finger. His heart raced. He knew he couldn't take the ring without confronting her. Moving as quietly as he could, Ono crept behind her. With a sudden burst of courage, he drew his sword and struck her from behind. The blade sank deep, and Olumiri let out a deafening scream that shook the cavern walls. Green glistening blood pooled around her as she crumpled to the ground. Even as she lay dying, Olumiri's voice was filled with venom. "I know why you have come," she rasped. "You seek the ring, but for the pain you have caused me, I curse you. You shall never see the wealth you crave. Your sons shall be bloodsuckers for all eternity." Onos laughed bitterly.
"You're bluffing. I have no sons,"
he said as he cut off a hand along with the ring. He placed the severed hand into a sack and turned to leave. Olomiri began to laugh, a chilling, eerie sound that echoed through the cave. The ground trembled and the walls began to crack. Stones fell from the ceiling as the cave started to collapse. Onos ran, clutching the sack tightly. Behind him, Olomiri's laughter grew louder, even as the cave caved in around her. Finally, with one last roar, the entrance collapsed, sealing her inside forever. Mike Kalu was a young, wealthy businessman whose successes made him the envy of his peers. Though he came from a wealthy family, Mike had built his own empire, and every venture he embarked on flourished. His sharp mind and relentless drive had earned him the admiration of many, but it also sparked jealousy among his contemporaries. On the 10th of November, Mike celebrated his 30th birthday in grand style. The event was the talk of the town, attended by his closest friends and business associates. The mansion was adorned with glittering lights, and the air buzzed with laughter and music. As the night progressed, the guests began to take their leave. Mike, ever the gracious host, walked each one to the gate with a wide smile. After seeing off the last of his friends, Mike turned and headed back toward his apartment. As he walked, a strange feeling washed over him. At first, he dismissed it, attributing it to the alcohol he had consumed. Shaking his head, he hurried inside and collapsed onto his bed, drifting into a deep sleep. In the dead of the night, Mike jolted awake. His body felt different. He stood in the middle of his room, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Without warning, he tore his shirt apart, clawing at his skin as dark fur began to sprout from his body. His teeth elongated into sharp fangs. Pain racked his form as his hands and feet twisted into claws. Overcome by an uncontrollable urge, he leapt out of the window, landing gracefully on the ground below. He sniffed the air, his heightened senses picking up the scent of human presence. A deep guttural growl escaped his throat as he lunged toward the fence, vaulting over it effortlessly. Prowling through the quiet estate, Mike's predatory instincts led him to the source of the human scent. Pa Akpan, the estate's elderly security guard, had just finished relieving himself and was making his way back to his post. In a flash, the beast pounced, dragging the old man into the shadows. The night swallowed his screams, leaving the estate in an eerie silence. As the first light of dawn broke, Mike woke up lying on the ground just outside his gate. His body ached and his head spun with confusion.
How did I get here?
He muttered, looking around in a panic. Realizing he was stark naked, he quickly scaled the back fence and slipped into his house before anyone could notice. Once inside, Mike sank onto the floor, his mind racing. The memories of the night was a blur, but the blood on his hands and his torn clothes painted a horrifying picture. Quickly, Mike got dressed and hurried outside. He approached Abby, the gate man.
Abby,
Mike began, his voice laced with urgency.
did anyone come into the house last night?
Abby shook his head.
No, sir. After you saw off the last of your guests, you didn't come out again.
Still unsatisfied, Mike rushed back into the house and found Ekaite, his domestic staff, cleaning the kitchen.
Ekaite,
He asked, his voice sharp.
did you notice anything unusual last night?
Ekaite frowned and scratched her head. Oga, I don't know. You sef no say when I sleep, I don't sleep. I no dey notice anything. Mike hissed in frustration and walked away. But just as Ekaite was about to resume her chores, her eyes widened. She froze in place. If you enjoyed this story and would like to know how the story progressed, please consider subscribing to this channel, not forgetting to turn on your bell notification icon so that once the next part is being posted, you will be the first to be notified. You can also check out these videos here. I promise you won't be disappointed. Till we meet again in my next video, remain blessed.